So I'm told that I'm audible now. So what I was saying, we are going to discuss the subject of voting, and we are going to thread the idea of voting in one of the structures that we are going to draw it on this board. And if I were to draw this structure, just to remind us where we are standing in prophetic history, because knowing where we are standing in prophetic history becomes very important, because that will give you a privilege to understand your environment or political environment. So the line of the 144 begins in 1989, and then we have here 2001. And then we come to, let's say, the National Sunday Law, which I will confidently put, I know we have different views, but let me just put 2024 as our National Sunday Law. And then we are going to have the close of probation. And then lastly, we're going to have the second advent. So as a people, I believe if this is the National Sunday of 2024, then we are post National Sunday. We are just in this history of this is the plowing, this is the former rain, then this is the latter rain, and then this is the harvest. So as an individual or as a corporate organization, we are here between National Sunday and the close of probation. So we are standing there, awaiting for a development for the increase of knowledge and formalization, leading us to Daniel 12, verse 1. So as we move forward, there are a couple of subjects that God is seeing it better to prepare us as a people for his second advent. And one of those topics is voting. And voting, based on my personal understanding, is the process of people choosing or making decision upon who, making decision on who, should govern them in every representative democracy, or people using it as a tool, to choose policies that governs them. And I understand that for now, we understand that our test is purely based on the last 6 commandments. So we have 4 and 6. And in the year 2020, I think the movement began having, a prophetic framework of how we approach the law based on our test of, gender equality. And we came to the conclusion, when we say that our test is equality, what we refer to is the last 6 commandment. The word equality is a code word. Equality here is a code word for the last 6 commandment. So next time you hear someone saying, our test is equality, in a simple term, that person or an individual is referring to the last 6 commandment. And the last 6 commandment, we don't take it just at a basic level. It has a lot of things. And you look at the last 6 commandment, there is a way the writers in the Bible, they approach it. And these writers in the Bible, especially, we are going to use Paul. Because Paul, if the last six commandment is dealing with humanity, then by virtue of methodology, we have to go to the Bible and try to, figure out a book that is purely, almost 99% dedicated to understanding the nature of humanity. And that portion of the scripture is the book of Romans. And the book of Romans, Paul is an author, and for what I've just discovered, understood from the leaders in the movement in the past study, that Paul has dedicated the book of Hebrews in understanding God. That is divinity. And the book of Romans, from chapter 1 up to the last chapter, is dealing with the humanity. And if we are following the recent presentation that Elder Paminda is doing, you realize that he's now focusing on the book of Hebrews and discussing our relation with God. But when it comes to the book of Romans, from chapter 1 to the last chapter, Paul will dedicate that book in understanding humanity. And in understanding the law, he will deal, when you read Romans chapter 13. In Romans chapter 13, Paul is bringing this idea of, we as human subjecting ourselves to the higher powers, the authorities. And these authorities, these powers, they are ordained by God for a specific purpose. And this government, they are structured based on the last six commandments. And Paul is going to quote the last six commandments, that government, by virtue of their establishment, they are intimately connected with the last six commandments. They have nothing to do with the poor. So if human beings, for example, have problem with another human being, by virtue of their government in which they live in, we have, institutions, structures that will end up, solving their problem. If you, for example, interfere with the rights of your fellow human being, for example, if you kill that person, that law, that government will be a terror to you. And how this government, they are structured, they have also their own document upon which, to issue their policies or governance. And this document, we call them, in developing democracies, we call them constitutions. Thank you. So we call them constitutions. So in the constitution is where the last six commandments are codified, that it can be better understood. And the people who come up with that constitution are the people of that specific country. And to have at least a good picture of how this institution works, the Lord, by his providence, he has given us a template to understand how these democracies are supposed to work. And he takes us to Revelation 13. Revelation 13, verse 11, where we are given a picture of two, of one beast, but coming in two forms. So we are going to have, John is going to tell us that, like, he's seeing a beast like a lamb. And then by virtue of time, this lamb-like beast is going to turn into a dragon. So we're going to have this one. For example, this is a lamb. This is a lamb. And we are told this lamb had two horns. And later on, this lamp is going through compare and contrast. If this lamp had two horns, then by virtue of compare and contrast, we are going to see that this dragon, I don't know how a dragon look like. So let me just draw something like terrible. I don't know how I can draw it. So this lamp, this dragon as well, is going to have two horns. So for you to understand the dragon, you have first to understand the lamp. And in recent studies, we have been told that the lamp is not what? The king of the north. But as an individual, I think the lamp, I should use the term, is the true king of the north. Because if you go to the book of Ezekiel, chapter 21, you'll hear Ezekiel telling, giving a story of how, Ezekiel as an individual, he was among the captives that were taken by Babylon. So as Daniel and his fellow were serving in the courts of Babylon, Ezekiel was among the captives, giving them hope. If you read that book, etc., etc. So he's telling them in Ezekiel chapter 21, I think verse 21 to 25 there, that the crown of Israel was taken and then it was overturned 3 times. And that overturning, based on the testimony of Ellen White in the book of Education, he will say that overturning, the crown was taken from Israel and then it was passed to Babylon, Middle Persia, Greece, and Rome. So we need to ask ourselves, whose crown was that? That was the crown belongs to who? To God, the true king of the north, because we have, verses telling us that God is from where? From the north, is the true king of the north. So as that crown was being passed successfully to different kingdoms, it came at a time when God, wants to reclaim that crown back to himself or herself. And the way God want to take that crown, and crown is a symbol of power, it's a symbol of leadership. And it is through the lamp, where God wants to take his crown back. But the false king of the north, whose leader, whose boss is Satan, will try as much as possible to take that crown for himself. But eventually at the end of time, that crown has to go back to the owner. And the symbology of the lamp, using the rule of the first mention, which demands that students of Bible prophecy or history to go back into history and find where that word was first used in the Bible, so that they can run through with that symbol to understand what's the meaning. And I understand the first mention of the word lamp is a story of Abraham, giving a lamp to, as a sacrifice for Isaac, to represent, to substitute Isaac. And that lamp, based on different analogy, people say is a symbol of Christ, which typifies the death of Christ, etc. So this lamp here, even though we say it's not the king of the north, I understand it must be the true king of the north, not the false king of the north, as those others typify. Now, this lamp, historically, it represents the rising of the United States in Bible prophecy. I think quite a number of us have that conclusion. And if we were to sketch, just give a brief sketch of the United States, we have, here is 538, which takes us to 1798. And in 538, this is a period of, is everything okay? Guza tu. Usichaji. Yeah, it's okay. So, oh, I think the power is off. Someone just did this. Oh, you knocked it down. Okay. I'm sorry about that. So what I was saying, you look at the history of the Sixth Kingdom, the history of 1260. And you realize that the United States was, geographically, you can mark the rise of the United States in the period of darkness. And in the period of darkness, we can understand that there is nothing good that's happening there. Of course, you can see some kind of reformation, which is good. But this power, which was rising in this period, we have to see some flaws. And those flaws, we have to see them in the understanding of humanity. Even though God is raising this power as something good, we have to see some flaws in the Constitution. So for so long, the United States has been under the jurisdiction of Great Britain. Right. So the United States has been under the jurisdiction of, it was a colony of the Great Britain. But to give a brief history, when it comes to 1773, we have what we call the Tea Party movement. And the Tea Party movement, it was an outcry of the oppression that the people were receiving from the Great Britain. That's where they began, detaching themselves from the Great Britain. But when you come to 2 years later, that is the year 1775, we have what we call the Battle of Lexington. Lexington and Concord. So they're going to, to fully detach themselves from Great Britain. They're going to win that war at a place called Lexington and Concord. And at that place, 1 year later, they're going to issue a Declaration of Independence in the month of July 4th. And in this declaration, what Declaration of Independence really means is that they are going to issue, they're going to say, like, we are, am I audible? They're going to say, the reason why we are detaching from Great Britain is because of this, this, and this. And they're going to, to table down their grievances. Like, you, Great Britain, you have been overtaxing us. You have been forcing us to work overseas with little payment. You have been forcing us not to bear arms, but you as a people, you bear arms. So this is what justifies us to separate ourselves from you, Great Britain. But one of the salient things that appears in the Declaration of Independence is that they brought the idea of life, liberty, that's on property, life, liberty, and happiness. That all people, they are entitled to have a happiness, and that government on earth, they are, built upon this framework of life, liberty, and happiness. And if a government becomes authoritarian, they don't meet this specification, then those governments have to be removed from power so that we can install a new government that is going to, dignify the life of people in terms of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So this is what they are going to say if you read the Declaration of Independence, the introduction. Then 1 year later, again in 1777, years later, 1787, there's a lot of things happening there, but I want us to bring 1789. So we have 1787, we have the Article of Confederation. And the Article of Confederation, basically, we have 13 colonies. But the problem with the Article of Confederation is that it cannot unify the Union. One state can say their own thing, the other state can say their own thing. They don't agree on matter maybe of taxes, how to give out taxes in terms of slavery, etc. So it could not unify the union, the Article of Confederation. So they had to come up with a document that it will have a federal government, which if it says this one, all other states should follow it. And that's what we have the Constitution here in 1789. But remember, all this development is happening during the period of what? 1260, the period of darkness. So we have to, by virtue, we have to see that this document, even though it's formed in 1789, we have to see a problem. And that problem, of course, we could see the idea of slavery, women, not all, because the Declaration of Independence says that all men are created equal. And it's until 1945, when we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We have one woman who was part of the committee to form the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to govern the United Nations. He challenged the Declaration of Independence, which says that all men are created equal, but it should say all humanity are created what? Equal. So you could see women were not, treated as human beings, etc. We have this French Revolution, a lot of things happening here. But one thing, as we come back to our topic, is that we come to 1863. So this lamb like beast, prophetically, we mark it here. And God is going to give it a probationary time, to continue preaching humanity, to respect all people, irrespective of their color, irrespective of their gender, irrespective of anything, just to respect humanity. And when it comes to voting right, if you go to the Constitution, to be honest, you'll never find any clause saying that, people have a right to vote. People did not have a right to vote. For example, it's only white people who could vote. And those white people, if you scale it, you realize that it's the white people who could own what? Property, and they could give what? Taxes. So those are the only people entitled to vote, to direct how a government works. So, and a government, by virtue, it's a political instrument in the hand of the people to enjoy, their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But when you find only a portion of a people, they are the one who enjoys life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, then that is not a perfect government, that. So the right to vote is not enshrined in the Constitution. It is very vague. It's up until when you come to 1798 up to 1863, where people began now to see like, okay, we need to be voting. But if you go to history, if you read either with Wikipedia, you realize that some states like New Jersey, the state of Wyoming, especially New Jersey and Wyoming, at some point, for example, in the year 1869, I know all of us here are saying that, okay, nationally, all women were allowed to vote in 1919, especially white women. But if you go back to 1869, you realize that the state of Wyoming had allowed only white women to vote. But later on, before 1919, they removed that status. The state of New Jersey, again, they did the same. But up until 1919, with that progress of the right for women to vote escalated. But to be fair enough, if you go to the Constitution, you will not find any clause saying that all people have a right to do what? To vote. But after the 13th Amendment was enshrined in the Constitution in 1863, through abolition of slavery, the Black people, they began, demanding their rights to do what? To vote. And from 14th Amendment, if you read 14th Amendment, no, this is the 13th Amendment, 1863. Then we have 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, 16, just from 14th Amendment to 19th Amendment. Let me take that one. Throughout this period of this amendment, you will see now, like, people, they began being included in the idea of of voting. So voting became a political ingredient in their governance. And as I've said, there is no clause here that says people have right to vote. It's until post 1863 where we see this, movement, we see these policies coming in the political stage demanding for inclusion of blacks, Hispanic, and also women, to have the right to vote, which will give them a tool to air their voice, how their life should be conducted, how they should seek happiness in terms maybe of freedom and also liberty to own property, etc. But if you go to Article 2, Article 2 to the US Constitution, it discusses the power of the presidency because Article 1 discusses legislature, Article 2 discusses the presidency, and Article 3 discusses the judiciary. But in Article 2, discussing the presidency, Article 2, Section 1, it gives us the, so this is Article, I'm sorry, my Article 2, Section 1 to the US Constitution, it gives Congress the liability to choose a national day of election. That's where we have November 5th, November, etc., especially November 5th, a time of having an election, but it doesn't give a priority of when people should, the right of people to vote. That's the problem that we see in the Constitution. But remember, the Constitution was tabled in the period of 60. That's why you see it has some flaws. Now, I don't want to have a broader sketch of the rights of people here, but you can go to the book A.T. Jones, because he was an expert of the Constitution. You can go to the book A.T. Jones. It's called The Rights of the People, ROP. You'll get all these narrative. Now, when discussing the voting, I'm saying voting is just a tool, is a process of people choosing their representatives or of choosing the policies to govern them, right? Now, if you want to look at, for example, this where voting is conducted in the institutions where voting are liable. So if you were to have a circle like this one, so these are three structures, the three arms of government. We are going to have the legislature, then we are going to have what? The executive, then we're going to have judiciary. Now, you realize that in the legislature, it comprises of two houses, the Senate and the House of what? House of Representatives. And if you want to look at the voting, as I've said, voting is a process of people choosing, the policies to govern them. And government policy is something that can change. And if you go to any government, those policies are usually formed in the parliament and then to be confirmed in the Senate. They are voted in, they are confirmed by the Senate through the idea of voting. That's what I've opened at legislature. When you come to at the executive, in choosing a president, that one is very basic. And I mean, people understand that voting happens in the presidential election. So we have voting in the legislature in choosing, policy, and then we have a voting taking place in the executive branch, especially when choosing a president. And when it comes to the judiciary, which is the most powerful arm in any government, because it gives the decision, it can control all this. This one can pass a policy, or this one can pass an executive order, but the judiciary can strike them down unless it's polarized, unless it's there's no checks and balances, as it's happening right now in the United States and many governments, including Kenya. So voting takes place in these three branches. Another event that voting can take place is what do you call the midterm election? You just say midterm midterm elections. Remember, as I said, voting is just, of people choosing their representative, whether it's a small group of people, etc. So in midterm elections, especially which takes place in the Senate, it's a process where like all the representatives, they want to control the House or the Senate, so that any policies that come in this in those chambers, those who take the majority seat, they can have a higher say, right? For example, if maybe the Republicans, or for example here in Kenya, like our National Assembly, if the Kenya Kwanza individual take control of the parliament, if a bill comes and the president wants that bill to go through, he may mobilize his entourage, like the likes of Kimani Chungo, and tell them, I want this bill to pass because you hold the majority. Can you vote for that bill? Vote for the finance bill, all those. So the midterm elections are very important as well. Same as in the United States. But midterm election usually happen in the United States. But I'm just giving a scenario that the control of legislature can influence public policy. And yes, that's what I was saying. So because in most cases, back in the old days, we used to focus so much where? In the executive, right? We used to focus so much in the executive branch. That's where the voting happens. But we forgot that voting, it matters a lot in the judiciary and legislature. And the reason why we focus so much on the executive branch is because of the study of Daniel 11, verse 2, which gives us the story of the kingdom of Middle Persia. And the story of the kingdom of Middle Persia, it tells us that, they are going to be what? Some kings, rising up, they are going to influence the world, which by virtue, we realize that those kings in that mentioned Daniel 11 verse 2, they typify, someone talking. Is that a problem? It's okay. All right. So, for example, we go to that chapter, we are told that in 536, we are going to have Darius and Cyrus. And after Cyrus, we are going to have which king? Cambyses? Cambyses, and then who? Polsmadis. And then we are going to have who? Darius, his steps. And then the fourth one shall be what? Xerxes, right? Xerxes of the book of Esther. So we realize that 536, it typifies 1989, okay? And we said in 1989, we have who? We have Reagan, who goes to George Bush. And then we had Clinton. And then false Madis is typified by who? Bush Jr. And then we have the last steps with Obama. And then we had Donald Trump with a symbol of Xerxes. So when we came up with that model back in 2000, I think 2016, 2017, I think, we realized that all these presidents, they take us to the executive branch. So we focus so much on, the idea of the executive branch. How many minutes remain? I don't want to take much time here. How many minutes? 30. 13? 19 minutes. Okay. So we're remaining 19 minutes. Okay. So I was saying there is much danger in, seeing voting as, only viable in the executive branch. So we have to see it cutting across these three branches. And I'm saying the reason why we focus so much on the executive branch is because of maybe this model. So we saw like presidency is very important. And I think even in Adventism today, you go to Adventism, they'll tell you like, they are focusing so much on the president. Which president is coming on in a political history in America? They will see Obama. Obama came and he passed a legislation to legalize sex and marriage. We are having Trump. We are having other presidents. So there's danger of focusing so much in the presidency alone. But the presidency has a much weight, in us as a movement, as we understand now, right? And we have quotations from the book Great Controversy, which says that the speaking of the nation is through its judicial and legislature. But even though Ellen White points us to those two branches, but we as a movement also realize that the executive branch also plays a vital role in Bible prophecy in understanding end time event. Okay, so we have said legislature, executive, and judicial. And then we have brought the idea of the midterm election. Midterm election, they are very important in understanding prophecy at the end of the day. Another thing that we can see election is very important is what? The RNC convention, the Republican National Convention. There also we have the delegates of the Republican, making their own votes to choose their leader, etc. And then we have also DNC, the Democrat National Convention. And I'm saying DNC, by virtue of the midnight cry, when Elder Tess was giving those presentations, he brought us what had happened in the DNC. It was all about voting, to interfere with her emails, just to interfere her voting. So also in choosing the delegates, the DNC also plays a key integral role. If I'm forgetting something, maybe, where can we also have, where voting takes place? Okay, so if say legislature, executive, judiciary, the midterm election, the RNC, and the DNC. Okay, someone is telling that's all, but maybe they're theirs. Okay. So this is the idea of voting. Now, how does it impact to our understanding of prophecy, or, for example, gender issues? And we realize that each and every president, when it comes to the White House, they have their own policies. They will end up, choosing who to take the Supreme Court seat. They're going to, to influence their legislature to pass this and that. So the presidency, as I've said, is very important aspect, legislature and the judiciary. So I want us to take us to see how does these things really function? How do they work in a prophetic structure? So I want us to draw this line. This is the year 2018. And then we have here 2022. Now, the reason why I'm choosing these 2 years, I think quite a number of you now can see what I'm trying to say here. And 2022 is a very, it's a very important waymark in our time. It's, I can say, in the history of the world, the history of 144, 2018 is very, very critical in the sense that we have what? Our midnight cry message. It's like a love cry in the history of the priest, but it really shaped our understanding of geopolitics, our understanding of, it changed our worldview, how we understand things right now. So it was a very critical moment with the ministry of Elder Tess Lambert. So we have Elder Tess there. And I'm conscious that all of us, by virtue of the understanding of their salvation, have gone through those presentations, and they're the one guiding us even in our study of the Sunday law right now with our members, those 4 members who are coming out, giving very robust arguments they have in regard to the Sunday law. At least, even at most, each and every speaker they have gotten something from the midnight cry. I don't think someone just come up and begin doing their own things. At least they have their anchor in the midnight cry. And then we have 2022. 2022, as a person, is a Etabo. I think the author, of course, is God. The person who was used to give this loud cry here, he also, at the end of this, I think 3 or 4 years, he gave something important here in 2022. And she has gone silent. And I usually take it by providence. I usually tell my friends, her disappearance from the public record, it's not just, a mere thing. I think there are reasons. And yes, there are reasons, just like it was in the life of Ellen White. Things could happen to Ellen White. She could disappear a little bit. But for Elder Tess, I don't know what's going on in this history. But when she stopped her study in the month of June, and in July when she gave the last presentation, these two waymarks really shaped our doctrinal understanding of things. Now, why am I drawing this two waymark, 2018 and 2022? Is because I have to focus on the idea of voting. Now, if you remember, in 2018, did Elder Tess discuss the importance of voting? Yes, she did. In discussing the battle between King of the North and the King of the South, one of the tools that King of the South used to conquer King of the North was voting. So voting was one of the things that King of the South used his disinformation strategy to attack the King of the North in the 2016 presidential election. And if you go back to 2022 again, when his book ending by Providence, before she went into silence, she discusses voting, those Vespers classes. So if you watch Vespers classes, she was just discussing the election campaign between God and Satan. On which side are we? She takes us to Eden model. She tells us Adam and Eve, they also tested based on, it was just a campaign. Who are you choosing? Whose government are you choosing? So you vote. I've put the tree of life and the forbidden tree there. So if you choose if you choose my instruction as God, you are voting for me. If you're going to disobey my guidelines and take the forbidden tree, who are you choosing? By virtue, you are choosing Satan kingdom. So it was a political campaign. It was about voting. And she's going to tell us, about how election works. She takes us to Australia. She takes us to Canada. She takes us to the US. How this, libertarianism, atheism, how election, influences them. But one thing that I can remember in 2016, she identified 5 battles. Okay. 2018, thank you. 2018, she identified 5 key battles. And one of the 5 key battles, the first one was what? Between the King of the North and King of the South? Ipsas. So we are going to have 2016. Then that was Ipsas. This is Ipsas. Okay? This is Ipsas. And the second battle was the Battle of what? Heraclea, which by virtue is what? Which year? 2018. And then we have Asculum, which by application is 2019. And then the battle that she identified is what? Beneventum, which by application is 2021. And then she identified Agos. And Agos, which by understanding right now, let me confidently put 2024. So we have said, historically, this was 301, right? 301 BC. This one was 270. 280. Then this one is 279. This one was 275. 275. Then this one was 272. Okay. So threading the vote, because our this was the battle between King of the North, King of the South. But one thing you realize, as the king of the north and the king of the south were just, in a battlefield of disinformation and, manipulation, there was something that, was taking place in the US. So king of the south took advantage of what was happening in the US, and that was voting. And Ellen White, Elder Tess took us to the 2016 presidential election in the lenses of, gender equality. And for us, for quite a number of people who, were in this period here in the movement, no one knew like that thing was that election was a test. No one knew, it was very important. We were just going on with our studies, but God had to confront us in 2 years later. So we had here an election. So the idea of voting was here. So let me just trade a story. I'm not just trading the story of the king of the north and king of the south in this one. At least you can understand. But internally, there was something happening here. So if you were to trade a story like this one, so in these 5 key battles, there was voting. In the Battle of Ipsas, there was a vote. Internally, the idea of voting was happening in the United States in the presidency, okay? Here, executive. So there's a vote here. Okay, we can agree on this one. Even though the king of the north continued with their battle. Now in 2018, was there a vote?
Yes. Midterm.
The midterm election. So here again, 2018, we can see a vote, right? That is a vote. 2019, can we see a vote? The idea of voting in 2019. Yeah. The impeachment scandal. So, and that impeachment, where did it take place?
Legislature.
In the legislature, which house? The Senate,
Both.
right? Both? Okay, all right. Yeah, because they have to pass that motion, then it go to the Senate. So we can see an impeachment saga, which was capitalized in terms of voting to remove someone. So internally, what's happening in the United States, there's idea of what? Voting. So here also we can see the idea of voting. Okay. 2021, Panion. Can we see something, surrounding the idea of voting?
Yes.
Yes? January 6th. So when they were certifying, the election of Joe Biden, there was idea of voting at Paniam. Okay? January 6th, this is for Paniam, there's idea of voting. So we can see that in these 5 key battles identified in 2018, internally in the US, it could just trade a story of voting inside the United States. We have the 2000 presidential election, we have the midterm election, we have the impeachment saga taking in the Senate, we also have the January 6th with the certification of Joe Biden presidency. Now, by virtue of being honest to the structures or lines, if you have had voting in these first 4 waymarks, do you think we cannot have voting in 2024? If you have had voting in this 4 waymark that was identified in 2018, what about in 2024, which is the end of that one? By providence, we are going to have a voting in 2024, and this voting, it's something important because globally, the earth, like this one, half of the earth's population, they went to what? To their polls. We could hear magazines, we could hear newsletters saying 2024 is the year of what? Of voting, the year of election. And recently, if I'm not someone to correct me on this, I had Elder Paminda saying 2016 was a prelude of what? 2024, right? So, and someone has come out and say 2024 is what? The Sunday law, okay? And she has, gave robust argument to show that 2024 is what? The Sunday law. One thing again, if Elder Paminda says this was a prelude of the Sunday law of this waymark, then we have to see do we have similarities between here and here? I remember from 2016 to 2024 is how many years? 8 years, okay? So it is 8 years. And my friend is telling me that 8 years is a symbol of what? Rebirth, okay? A repeat of something. Now we need to be very careful because we have people saying that the 2024 election was stolen from who? Kamala Harris. Yes, we respect those opinions, but someone has to come with a robust prophetic logic. Here, so if they were stolen from Harris, which means Harris won the election. See, Harris won the election. If someone say it was stolen. Now here, did Clinton won the election? She won the election. The popular vote, people voted for him, but through disinformation campaign by the external powers, like it was snatched from her. But people, the popular vote, she won, but it was snatched from her. Like I said, through patriarchy, because King of the South is a model of man over woman, state over the church. But when you come to this history here, you know, people here, they voted for her, okay? They could confidently say, we voted for Clinton, but what happened? It was stolen. Now, when you come here as a flip, will you say that, for example, because we have to work by evidence, the news, every news, even the Democrats, they believe that that vote was not stolen from Kamala Harris. It was confidently won by who? Donald Trump. He won it. Like here, people are not blinded. We're not blinded so much, right? But by the time we come here with the increase of knowledge, all this development happening, people, like, they have known who Donald Trump is. And Donald Trump is not the problem. Donald Trump is a symptom of the society, of how society is sick. So they voted for what they wanted, depending on what geopolitics was there. So that's what was happening here. So in these 8 years, with this 5 battle, we could see the idea of election beginning and ending here. And one of the methodologies that we are told, the idea of voting, is in 2024. I think Elder Terry, he utilized the idea of Quintus Fabius Maximum Gauges. And in a study of Quintus Fabius Maximum Gauges, he identified what? The month of July, okay? So July here I say, okay, and July, she did not take us to the judiciary, legislature, or executive, or the midterm election. Where did she take us to?
RNC.
The RNC, right? Now, our question is, why did Elder Terry take us to RNC? And is RNC very important? That is the question. Now, remember, from 2016 to 2024 is what? 8 years. A rebirth, a repeat of some events, but in a different framework and enlarging, okay? So, I gave us 2018 and 2022. So in 2022, Elder Tess, there's a one of the titles, if I can remember, it's called The Left and Their Multipolar Vision. In that study, the left and their multipolar vision, the Vespers classes, she's going to take us back to 2016. And she's going to say, in 26, no, the reason why she takes us there, she's saying like this. She has a problem with this movement, that us as a movement, we have not changed. Someone asked her, Elder Tess, when will be the Sunday law? And she was kind of irritated. She says, I don't care when the Sunday law will be. I have nothing to do with the Sunday law. The problem I have is that we still have problem in the left. So she was having problem with the left wing in terms of sifting sources. That why you asking me the Sunday law, yet you are not prepared for that Sunday law. So what important Sunday law help you if you have problem in the left? And then to support her logic, she's going back in 2016 and tell us that even though the Battle of Ipsas was November 5th, the general election, she has a problem with the left-wingers. And she's going to tell us that Clinton had to win this election in 2016. And she's going to tell us Clinton had how many battles in 2016? 2 battles. So she had the battle, the DNC battle, and then she had what? The November 5th of 2016 battle, the national election. So she's not focusing on this one. She's going to tell us that Clinton had to fight with who? So she's going to have Clinton versus Bernie Sanders. So she's going to have a battle with Bernie Sanders. And then later on, she's going to have a battle with who? Clinton
Trump.
versus Trump. So ideally, before she began, Elder Terry began, teaching the idea of voting. Elder Tess had begun seeing that voting, the RNC and DNC are very important as well. So she says in 2016, Clinton had two battles. First, he had to begin at home because there's a problem at home. And that the DNC of 2016 took place in which month? The month of July. So the July of 2016, there was a voting within the DNC delegates. Who are they going to send? I mean, to use as a presidential candidate to vie with Donald Trump. And majority of people, they were almost voting for who? Bernie Sanders. And she says Bernie Sanders was not a solution to the problem. It was Hillary Clinton in understanding gender issues. Bernie Sanders, if you go to Twitter account, currently X, LTS says Bernie Sanders has a very, misunderstanding of social justice. For Bernie Sanders, in a tweet, you'll hear him discussing what? Oligarchy, economy, Palestinian. But when it comes to the issue of gender equality, Bernie Sanders is out. It's very subtle. She doesn't understand, have a good picture of gender equality and policies as opposed to Hillary Clinton. So Bernie Sanders was not a solution. And if he had won that DNC, of course, he couldn't have won. It was just Hillary Clinton. So that is the battle that Hillary had, the DNC, voting. So in those Vespers classes, she's telling us that the DNC was very important in 2016. And Hillary Clinton narrowly, he won that voting in a very small margin than Bernie Sanders. So you could see how many people voted for Bernie Sanders, very the wrong candidate as opposed to Hillary Clinton. Then on November 5th, when she went there, she was just defeated through disinformation, but she won the popular vote. Now, mark this one. July was very important in 2016 than November 5th, even though Ipsos tells us this story. But to be complex, as the messengers tells us, the DNC was very important. That was a very battle that Hillary Clinton had to vote because no one took us there. 8 years later, someone is coming again and tell us, listen, November 5th of 2024 is not what you think. Go back to July of 2024 to see what? The RNC. So at the beginning of this first battle, we are taken to DNC, but at the end of it, we are taken again back to July. So we don't have a model to show like July was a waymark here. It was just an event. But here through Quintus Fabius Maximum Gauges, we are told that July is a prophetic what? Model. So it's just like a rebirth of this history, but flipped. Here is DNC, here is what? RNC. So what I wanted to say is that we have models, like for someone to come up and say like, Hillary, who was the vice president deputizing Biden? Harris, okay? So if you say the vote was stolen from Harris, you'll be clouding a lot of logic. Like now, okay, you mean people voted for who? For Hillary Clinton, for Kamala Harris, then it was stolen from him by Trump. So are we justifying like, patriarchy doesn't exist? Because you could see like many people here, we were patriarchal, like that RNC. Many people voted for Trump. They'll say, we want a man, not a woman. They name call her a lot of things. So that one justified that indeed Trump won the election, not Harris, okay? Even though Elder Terry recently are saying that, women need institutions. but you could see how the system differentiates women a lot. The time is over, right?
Yeah.
It's over by how many minutes?
By 7 minutes.
We are past 7, okay? So in summary, I'm sorry for putting you there, but when you look at the vote, I'll just come here and say, I'm not repeating all this, that the voting is intimately connected to the last 6 commandments. And the voting in government, especially in the US, for example, where we had National Sunday Law, we have voting takes place in the legislature, executive, judiciary. We could see that. But our blindness should not, blind us not to see the importance of voting at DNC, RNC, and midterm election. And we could see that through these 5 waymarks that were given here in 2018, is that 2016, 2018, 2019, 2021, 2024, they all capitalize in these votings that happen here. 2016, we have the presidential election. 2018, we had the midterm election. 2019, we have the Senate, the impeachment saga. 2021, we have also the Senate January 6th, certification of election, voting, and then 2024, which it was just like an earthquake of voting around the world, which spilled over to 2025. So 2016, the most important election, according to her testimony, was the DNC as opposed to November 5th, even though, yes, it's very important, but we have to focus on the month of July of 2016. Clinton had a battle with Bernie Sanders. And at the end of it, 8 years later, a rebirth, we also have a woman and a man. But now here it's not DNC. We could not focus so much on DNC. We had to focus on what? The RNC. That's what I had to say for now. So I beg to stop there. And if people have questions, very soon I'll be online. We'll discuss those. Maybe we'll ask Brian at the same time. So I ask to pray. Okay. Okay. Holy God in heaven, we thank you for goodness and mercies. We thank you for this day that we have had. We thank you for this beautiful moment that you have given us to share your word in regard to voting, which has been a very critical moment, a critical thing, a critical tool in our campaign to choose your kingdom, between your kingdom and the kingdom of Satan. We pray, as far as we are concerned, those who are online, that we follow your guidelines to choose you, to choose wisely. As we retire to our bearings, may you be with us and unite us to have the spirit of humbleness, to consider whether we are in the faith. Guide each and every one of us is a humble prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.